Okay, welcome to our Tuesday night Torah class. I'm glad to see all you people here, and glad you guys tuned in on YouTube. Um, Let me see if I. People are still kind of. We've had a bunch of work and cleaned up things today, so we're still kind of milling around. But I'm sure we'll get settled down here in a minute. We're cleaning up the place. We're having a B'nai Yosef North America's regional gathering is this coming weekend. If you want to know more about that, you need to look at our website, livingmessiah.com. Anyway, okay. Why don't you let me open in a word of prayer? Father God, thank you for the evening. Thank you for this group of people that found time in their schedule to come out and look at your Torah. I'd ask God that you'd be in our discussion tonight, that you'd speak to our hearts, that you'd help us understand a little more of your word, appreciate it, appreciate how much you love us, understand more completely how you'd like us to be obedient, how much you'd like us to be obedient, and what it really means. And we just thank you, God, for leading us along this path and for loving us like you do. In Yeshua's name, amen. Okay, since we have a couple of new people, I always, those of you that come all the time probably get tired of hearing this, but I'll do it again anyway. The Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis through Deuteronomy, and they have been divided into 54 different portions. Each portion is called a parashah or a parsha. And if you do a portion a week, by the time you get through a year, you've covered the whole Torah. And this has been a tradition that has, it's been around since Yeshua's time, because there are references in the Gospels to the different Torah portions that were being read on different days. So that's been around a long, long time. And so that's kind of what we're doing, except that whenever you strict to the schedule of one portion per week, a lot of times you have to rush through it because you get caught up in discussions and you're not really, you don't have the luxury of sitting there and exploring things in more detail. And then next week you have to move on to the next one. So as a group, we took a vote at the beginning and we decided to go through the Torah and we'd cover as much as we could cover in an hour and a half, and then we'd quit. And the next week we'd pick up where we left off. And it works out that maybe it's not taking us 2 years to do a 1-year Torah cycle, but it's taken us more than one. So it's probably about a year and a half. And where we are now is we're in Deuteronomy. So many of the people here in this room have been through starting from Genesis 1:1. But one of the things about doing this is that when you get through, typically if you go through the cycle the way it's been described historically, you end the last chapter, the last portion of Deuteronomy during the Feast of Sukkot. And the end of Sukkot is a day they call Simchat Torah, which means translated as the joy of Torah. And after you finish doing that last portion, have a big celebration and everybody dances around the room and they wrap the scroll from the end of Deuteronomy all the way back to Genesis 1:1. And then the very next week, when you meet together again for a weekly Torah portion, you start at Genesis 1 and you go through the whole cycle again. And so every year at Sukkot, you end up in Deuteronomy finishing the Torah. The first time I went through it, the second time, I was steeped in, Greek thought is what I've come to call it, which is you take a course, you learn the material, and you're done with it. Why would you ever want to go back and take it again? But I was surprised the second time through. There was stuff I'd missed. There was stuff that I didn't understand the first time through that I understood the second. And here it is. This has got to be, it's at least 16 or 17 times I've been through this. And every single time I learn something new. And it just gets better and better all the time. And part of the reason I learn it is because we're all learning it together. The discussion is, you people are the ones that teach me, because we'll come up with something and I'll look at that and I'll say, well, I never saw it that way before. That's pretty interesting. And so I'd invite you to do this over and over again. This is not something that you want to do once. This is something that you want to do kind of as a lifestyle. Anyway, with all that said, last week we were in Deuteronomy chapter 14, and we had actually read chapter 15, and we got off into a discussion. Chapter 15 in my Bible has got a heading that says the year for canceling debts. And we got off on a discussion about that, and I personally didn't really feel like I was that much. I didn't have a complete understanding. Not that I do now, but I went off and did some research and messing around on this year of canceling debts. Does anybody remember the Hebrew term for this year of canceling debts? Well, Jubilee is one of them. Jubilee is the one that occurs on the 50th year, but this is the 7th year.
Shemitah?
Shemitah is what it is, and it's the year for canceling debts, or the year. It's the year that it turns out that there are two major things that God has prescribed that happen on the 7th year. It's a lot of times in English, it's called the sabbatical year. One of the things that it talks about in the Torah about Shemitah, the 7th year, it's the year that the farmers are supposed to leave their crops unplanted. You don't harvest, you don't plant, and you don't harvest. You can eat on what comes up naturally if you want to, but you don't go out and harvest it and do whatever you do to process it to sell it. It sits fallow. Furthermore, the poor are allowed to come in and forage and take what they want. And there's a big discussion in the Torah about how are you supposed to eat if you don't plant and reap the crops. And God says, well, if you'll do what I tell you, I'll take care of that. You won't have to worry about it. You'll make enough in the 6th year that you can live fine in the 7th year, and the 8th year you can start over again. Well, one of the things I found out in looking at this is the Jews had, the Israelites, I should say, Israelites had poor performance in this area. They hardly ever did this. And some of it is even scripturally based. You know, when I could find it, I didn't really write down the reference, but when God sent he saw fit to have Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians capture Judah and take control of Jerusalem, and shipped all the people to Babylon, and they spent 70 years in Babylon before the Babylonians were conquered by the Persians, and the Persians told them that they could go home. And it's in one of 1st or 2nd Kings, probably 2nd Kings. At the end there, I think it's God tells Jeremiah, he says, tell the people that the time they're going to spend in Babylon is 70 years. And that's 1 year for every Shemitah that you didn't give me. That's what he says. That's what God says. So 70 Shemitahs. If there's 70 Shemitahs and they come along every 7 years, how many years are we talking about? 490. So God accused the Israelites of not doing it for 490 years. So, and that's really about all of their existence. I mean, it wasn't quite that bad, but they obviously had a poor performance doing this. And so, again, and looking at it a little bit more, there's two things. It's the year for not growing stuff, year for letting your land just rest and do whatever it does naturally. And the other thing that happens is this thing we were reading about last week, the year for canceling debts. And so I want to go through and read this again and talk about that. And that's another thing they had very poor performance doing. So let me read it, and then we'll talk about it some. Mike, yes. Wait, got to get a microphone.
Recently I learned something about, I can't remember where I saw this. I probably saw a video or something, or somebody told me that when you have a bankruptcy,
Mm-hmm.
and your debt is forgiven, but it's a 7-year period from the time you claim bankruptcy till they clear that off your record.
So you get to start over.
So I can't remember where I saw somebody was saying how the I can't remember, but the laws like that are actually based on the Torah.
Yep. There's a lot of the laws that we have currently that are based on that stuff. So, did anybody else have anything? Let me read this, and then we'll kind of get back into the discussion if that's all right. So I'm going to read from chapter 15, from the beginning through verse 18, and then we'll talk. So, at the end of every 7 years, you must cancel debts. This is how it is to be done. Every creditor shall cancel the loan that he has made to his fellow Israelite. He shall not require payment from his fellow Israelite or brother, because Yahweh's time for canceling debts has been proclaimed. You may require payment from a foreigner, but you must cancel any debt that your brother owes you. However, there should be no poor among you, for in the land that Yahweh your God is giving you to possess as your inheritance, he will richly bless you, if only you fully obey Yahweh your God and are careful to do all that he commands, all these commands that I'm giving you today. For Yahweh your God will bless you as he has promised, and you will lend to many nations, but will borrow from none. You will rule over many nations, but none will rule over you. If there is a poor man among your brothers in any of the towns of the land that Yahweh your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward your poor brother. Rather, be open-handed and freely lend him whatever he needs. Be careful not to harbor this wicked thought. The 7th year, the year for canceling debts, is near, so that you do not show ill will toward your needy brother and give him nothing. Then he may then appeal to Yahweh against you, and you will be found guilty of sin. Give generously to him, and do so without a grudging heart. Then because of this, Yahweh your God will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to. There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed toward your brothers and toward the poor and needy in your land. I think I'll quit there. So we read that, and we talked about that a little while. And I was surprised to find out in researching this that our Jewish brothers have struggled with this for literally all of their existence, because it's hard to do business this way. You know, how can you loan somebody money and then at the end of 7 years, you know, when the Shemitah comes around, all loans are forgiven. How can you not fall into this trap that's described here, where, you know, your brother comes to you and says, you know, why don't you loan me a bunch of money? And you look at your calendar and you say, man, next year's Shemitah, if I loan him the money, I'll never get it back, you know? So that is a difficulty, and they've had trouble figuring out how to do this. And they've been trying for a long time. One of the things they came around with, which was, to me, such an obvious get around that it sounds kind of like you can't be serious. But it's what they do is they would give, somehow or another, they would give title to stuff to non-Jews for the year of Shemitah. And so then they weren't collecting rent, or, you know, the things remained owed. And then whenever the Shemitah year was over, they would get it back. So there was, and I thought, like, you know, you think God's going to buy into that? But they did that for a while. And then they also had a lot of discussions about what you do forgiving debts, you know, and they one of the things they came up with was that you could have a moratorium, you know, okay, for this year you don't have to make payments on the debt, but then at the end of the 7th year, we're back where we started at the beginning of the 7th year. You know, it's just like a year off. And I don't know, that seems a little bit better, but they've had a lot of hard times. What I wanted to get a discussion going is, what do you think about that? Do you think, I mean, certainly today, it's almost impossible for us to conceive of anything like this. I mean, my gosh, when we sign a mortgage, we're committing ourselves to 30 years or something, you know? That's incredible. How would society function if we did this the way it was really supposed to be done? And there's good reason for talking about this, because we'd like to do this, you know, and I'd like to understand how we might implement it. John?
Well, if you were in a community that's trying to follow the Torah, you know, would you have a 30-year mortgage to compare what you were saying? That wouldn't even exist.
That. Yeah.
So I don't know. We're looking at the rules that the Torah is applying to people who would work if they're doing all the other stuff in the Torah that you're supposed to be doing, which we're not doing. So it's hard to comprehend that would make sense.
Yeah.
From our perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Joe's got something.
Yeah, I was just looking at the scripture here in the context. It says, every creditor that lendeth aught unto his neighbor shall release it. Seems like the key word of this is release. And then down here in the next verse, because the release has been proclaimed unto the Lord, not to the people, but unto the Lord. It's a release unto him.
Well, but you as the loaner of the money, it's a release. I mean, you lost your money, so to speak. Well, okay, fine. Yep, I'll buy that. Go ahead.
And then he also says, if you'll do this, just watch what I'll do.
Yes, yes.
So back to what John said, it becomes so important for us to fully want to do, right? Obey, and then he'll bless. And so the concept is it doesn't even matter what the other person does. All it does is matter that we obey him, and then we have joy in the obedience, and that's the full faith, right? That's a full trust that he's taking care of it, and that even if we go to when Yahusha says that we're going to be blessed for being persecuted, it's that full heart's desire that, okay, you said rejoice and be exceedingly glad. So that's blessing and favor in itself.
Yep.
And then it blesses him, and then right.
I guess as you were talking, the thing that came to my mind was the fact that let me start off by saying I think God tests us probably nowhere more completely than with money. Because what he's asking you to do here, he's asking you to essentially give the money to your brother and don't expect it to be returned. And then when if it's returned, you rejoice. But even if it's not returned, you've been obedient, and he promises to bless you for that. So that I like that. And I'm sure there's a lot to that. As a matter of fact, that goes along with one of the things that we've learned all the way through Torah, is that we have to take an active role in the health, care, and welfare of our community members. That's our problem. That's not something that we give to the government or something that we turn a blind eye to. It's our job to take care of the poor, the needy, the widows, and the orphans in our community. And this is part of doing that. On the other hand, there'll be people that'll take advantage of that. There'll be people that will say, Shemitah's coming up next year. I'm going to go borrow a bunch of money. So there ought to be something to be said for that too. I don't know what it is, but Mark.
Two things. Hopefully I'll remember the second one when I get done with the first one. So in a mortgage, you're not allowed to charge interest to your brother. So that's those houses are 3 times the value of the home by the time you get done.
Yep.
That brings it down to 10 years. You could actually pay it off if you didn't have to pay it off 3 times as much.
Yep.
If it's 10 years, then the payment could be adjusted a little bit to where you could actually pay it off within that 7. So that's doable.
Yes.
And so with the cars, obviously easy, as you reduce the interest out of the way, and it makes things a lot easier to do. On the Shemitah, you loan your brother the money, because you're supposed to take care of the needy, right? The poor among you. What if he's not keeping Torah the way you think he should? Are we allowed to make that kind of judgment?
Yeah. No, I don't know. I actually know. I know.
So kind of what going along with what Mark was asking or prompting, and what you were saying about the guy that's taking advantage of it. Well, at some point, there's always excommunication. Yeah. The guy who's taking advantage of it and being a sloth and not doing anything and not trying to be productive in what they do and expect them to keep going and keep taking advantage of, and we're just supposed to pay because God said so. I mean, you run the risk of being excommunicated at some point, don't you?
Well, yeah, not only that, but you certainly run the risk of the wrath of God, right? Because he knows. I was going to say, if I were in that position, if I knew going into it that I had borrowed money 3 or 4, 21 years ago and had never paid it back and have done this 2 or 3 times, then it's going to affect my entire thought process. I'm going to run around with all kinds of, I'm going to run around lying to myself so I don't have to face up to the fact that I'm guilty of not paying back the money. So I don't know. So it probably carries, but how would you excommunicate him? I can only see that happening if he does something that would warrant that. Do you think they did that?
Well, they didn't do a lot of things, but that doesn't mean.
I don't, there's no place in Torah where it says you can only do this 4 times and then we're excommunicating you or something. So that's a good question.
I don't know.
I don't have the
think
answer
about
to
it, I
it.
guess.
Yeah. That's really what I'm wanting to do is think about this, because if we were to do this, what would it look like is what I'm really asking.
It really doesn't make any difference whether the guy is going to do whatever. You do what right before the Lord.
Yes.
And let the other guy, it doesn't make any difference what he's going to do, make sure that you do it.
That's right. That's exactly right. Sometimes that's easier said than done, but that's right.
And part of it too, going off what Joe just said, is the idea that, okay, we're supposed to do that, but look at what we accept right now in our own culture. And if they're intimidating to us, we forgive them their debt to us.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're the little guy that we think we can excommunicate or we can do something to, there's more of this grudge that's held or this control issue that goes on in us. So if people stop and think about how we already forgive things that are happening to us on a daily basis from people that we don't think we can do anything about, it's a little backwards. But because I think those are the situations we need to hold accountable. But the ones, like you said, he's taking care of it, and it's us living in the fear of him that we just totally trust him.
Yeah, that's right. I'm reminded of the parable of the wicked servant, where the servant he owed his boss 10,000 talents, his master 10,000 talents, which is 2 lifetimes worth of earnings. And his master, he went to him and says, I can't pay you back. And his master forgave him. And then he turned around, some guy owed him a couple of rubles or whatever. And he says, oh, that's terrible. I'm going to, he had him thrown in prison. And the story of the parable, the point of the parable is, if God forgives you of a bunch of sins, then you better forgive your neighbor or the one that's in debt to you of whatever, a small amount. So it applies there, I think. Yes.
So I'm just thinking of if the debt had been forgiven, you've only got 7 more years to accumulate debt.
Uh-huh.
So how much debt could it possibly be?
Well, that's a fair point. As a matter of fact, one of the things, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Okay. And then I was just going to say also, I think the gift of giving is one of the gifts. And so it's just kind of stating what everyone else did, that it's more of our heart posture.
Yes.
And the fact that we realize that what we have is not ours anyway. It's all from him.
Yep.
And I guess worst case scenario is if they borrow everything you have, you just borrow it back.
There you go. I hadn't thought about that. One of the things it said in some of the reading I was doing is that if you keep somebody encumbered without any chance, so that he says to himself, oh man, I'll never be able to pay this back, then he certainly won't. But if you were to forgive him his debt, he might, everything else being equal, he might say, okay, this is a fresh start. I realize this is a gift, if not from the guy that loaned me the money, certainly from God. I better get my act together, and, I can start with a clean slate, like bankruptcy. Start from a clean slate. I'm going to do a better job now. I'm going to try to make sure I do all this right so that I'm not in this same position. And that's really all God wants, right? He just wants you to get your act together, and perish the thought that you should have to go through the cycle over and over again. But anyway, yes.
So it's interesting that in verse 2 of chapter 15, it says, this is the manner of remission. Every creditor shall shemot. What's the word we always know
Shemot
for?
is names, isn't it?
It's the book of Exodus, right?
Yeah.
So over in Exodus, it's pronounced just a little different. Same Hebrew letters,
Yeah.
but this shemot, instead of shemot, it's shamot,
Uh-huh.
means release of a
Release.
debt.
Okay.
Isn't that what he did when he took us out of Egypt?
Well, yeah. Yeah. that's
Didn't he
a good
release us of a debt? And
Yeah.
when the second Exodus comes, are we going to be released?
point. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to make sure we remembered is that this is for our fellow citizens, our community members. The foreigners, you don't have, this rule does not apply to foreigners. It applies to our brothers and sisters. Esther.
Well, I was looking on verse 9,
Uh-huh.
and it says that even if you lend it to him and you have an evil eye against the poor brother, it says,
Uh-huh.
and he cries out to the Lord, then it becomes sin.
Yeah.
And sin just means that you missed the mark.
Yeah.
So you missed the mark to doing what verse 1 and 2 says.
Mhm.
That's all you did.
Yeah.
Just missed the mark. Sin.
Yeah. Yeah. It's in the one hand, that is all you did. But in the other hand, you missed, the way I'd look at it is you missed a blessing. Yeah. Yeah. You missed the blessing. Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking here in verse 5. If you carefully hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God to observe to do all these commandments which I command you. Okay, if a guy comes up and says, hey, I need $1,000, okay, according to the commandment, you're to give him that. For the Lord thy God, after you do that, God's going to bless thee, because where did they get the money to lend into other nations?
Mm-hmm.
If God is like, if you give God 10% of your income,
Mm-hmm.
God's going to bless you. He's going to make that
Yeah.
more. He's going to
Yeah.
increase that
Yeah.
so that you can maybe lend to others.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true.
You're always going to have the borrowers, and you're always going to have those with money that are able to lend.
Yes.
And usually those that are able to lend will be following the rules.
Yeah.
They will be tithing. They will be
Part of how they got there.
doing the 6 days of work, keeping
Yeah.
the Sabbath. They will be keeping Torah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you find that here, even with the bankruptcy laws.
Mm-hmm.
The bankruptcy laws, I have firsthand witnessed many people who have gotten credit cards and they're just maxing them out. They're
Yeah.
driving around, new cars. They're driving around. They go buy themselves new clothes and everything. And then there are those that are not living lavishly like that, but just being frugal and
Yeah.
and they're able to lend.
Yeah.
And so you're always going to have the cons that are always going to be taking
Yeah.
advantage. And Israel was an example.
Yeah.
The thing we have to remember is that Yahweh is keeping the accounting.
Yes. Yes.
And those books,
Yeah. And his books are never wrong.
right?
Yeah.
There's no second set of books. There's nothing else.
Yeah. Yeah.
The books are there, and that's what it is.
Yeah.
And
Well, like I say, when you were talking about there are those that are able to lend,
Yeah.
it's important that those members of the community realize that that's a responsibility that they have.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you do. And I think just like with family members, you're going to have family members that they're always wanting something. They're always needing.
Yeah.
They're always expecting that tribal.
Yeah.
Situation to where, oh yeah, you got that. That's mine because I'm part of the family.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But when it comes to them sharing,
Yeah.
forget you.
Yeah. This needs to
Yeah.
be, I guess, if nothing else, this needs to be looked at a lot more because I think it really has a big impact, again, on the way we live our lives. John.
So to the topic of, is the Shemitah a fixed date where
Yes.
everybody follows it,
Yes.
or is it on an individual by individual basis?
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking it's the former. And let me explain why I think it still works. If there's only a year left before the Shemitah year, right?
Mhm.
Then the tendency, well, I don't want to lend it to you because then you'll just declare,
Yeah, you just won't pay it back.
right.
Yeah.
Well, okay, but I'm not only going to lend you a year's worth of provisions or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's built in that you can always come back and ask for another
Yeah.
loan after the Shemitah's over.
Sure. Sure. As a matter of fact, it occurred to me just as we were discussing this, which is one of the reasons I like doing this. I imagine you're also allowed to, well, what do you want the money for? I mean, you can't go to your
I want to
rich
borrow,
uncle and say, I need $1,000 here, give me it. You know, well, what are you going to do with it? You have the, I don't think that's an unfair question to ask.
yeah, it's something I got to spend something in the next 6 years. Well, the Shemitah's coming up in a year. Why don't we
Why don't I give
readdress
you
this?
$200 now and we'll talk
Right.
about it later. Yeah,
Exactly.
The rest later. Yeah,
So I think
that's fair.
I believe based on other things, it's a fixed date. It isn't
I do too. But we're coming up to a place I'll differ with that. But I agree with that. There's too many other clues here about everybody knows the year. It's as a matter of fact, in that one thing, make sure you don't have this in your attitude. It says, if there's a poor man, I'm in verse 7. If there's a poor man among your brothers in any of your towns that land, okay, do not be tight-fisted, rather be open-handed, whatever his needs. Be careful not to harbor this wicked thought. The 7th year for canceling debts is near. So that implies it's not a moving thing. It's a specific year. Yeah.
Well, I remember, I forget the exact address, but it states, and this was, I think, one of the prophets, and God was stating, it was about, tithing and all that, and Yah, like, literally imparted a challenge upon the people, say, test me,
Yeah.
and see whether, and it was like, he was like,
Test me. Yeah. And it's the same thing here. I can understand why many people historically had great trouble. Many Israelites had great trouble saying, okay, this year I'm not going to plant. I'm just going to see what grows and I'm going to live on that. That takes a great deal of faith, right? That really would take a great deal of faith. I'm sure some did. Well, as a matter of fact, they struggle with that today over there. Because, as a matter of fact, I think it's this year or next year is the Shemitah year, the way they've been counting. And you know what they've done is they deed their property to a Gentile for a year. And at the end of the year, they deed it back. That way, they okay, I didn't plant it. I don't know what's going on with it. That's his deal. He's doing it. But like I say, you don't think God sees through that? I guess my thought is this whole Shemitah thing is something that's probably pretty hard to do. Certainly, it has been historically, and it will be for us. But I think it's worth it because, as Joe says, if you just are obedient, you'll get blessed for it. Let's move on to one little last topic. It's the next thing in this section. It's from verse 12 through 18. It says, if a fellow Hebrew, a man or a woman, sells himself to you and serves you 6 years, in the 7th year you must let him go free. And when you release him, do not send him away empty-handed. Supply him liberally from your flock and your threshing floor, your winepress. Give to him as Yahweh your God has blessed you. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and Yahweh your God redeemed you. That is why I give you this command today. But if your servant says to you, I do not want to leave you because he loves you and your family and is well off with you, then take an awl and push it through his earlobe into the door, and he will become your servant for life. Do the same for your maidservant. Do not consider it a hardship to set your servant free, because his service to you these 6 years, has been worth twice as much as that of a hired hand, and Yahweh your God will bless you in everything you do. Now that, John, I think is one that's not necessarily on the Shemitah. That's just every 7, the start date, you start the clock running, and at the end of the 6th year, the clock quits and you have to let him go. Yeah, to be a servant. If you sold yourself to serve and there's 2 things to note here. First of all, the most important thing is it's a Hebrew, it's an Israelite that's selling himself to another Israelite. And I think we talked about this. Why might a guy do that?
Well, he's just a bond servant. I mean, he's got a bond, and when that bond is up, he's got to decide what to do if he wants to keep going or.
Okay.
Or,
no, I just meant why would he
selling himself? I sold myself when I did a contract at the city of Phoenix for 6 months.
Okay.
So the bond was the contract.
Yeah.
And I agreed to work there for a period of time, and they agreed to pay me so much.
Okay.
So
okay.
I sold myself. Oh my goodness.
But okay, then I like that. I understand that. But then down here at the bottom it says, verse 18: "Do not consider it hardship to set your servant free, because his service to you these 6 years has been worth twice as much as that of a hired hand."
Well,
so you can also have a hired hand.
Is the hired hand an Israelite? He's not a Hebrew, is he?
Well, it doesn't say. But my thought is it has to do, I think, I could be wrong about this, but it has to do with the differences of expectations when you go to work for this master, this employer.
Right.
If your expectations is at the end of the day, I want my money, that's a hired hand.
Right.
Be it Hebrew or non-Hebrew. If it's a day's work for a day's pay, that's a hired hand. But the servant, I think typically, and I was going to have a little discussion about this too. Back then they didn't have employment contracts and equal employment opportunity and all the rest of this stuff, So it was pretty hard to figure out, it was hard to find a good job, right? And if you, like you say, contracted with someone, and he treated you decently, number one, and number two, provided you with a decent place to live and 3 squares a day or whatever, and the work was not onerous or horrible, then you might very well say at the end of 6 years, this is a good gig, I'm staying, right?
Well, yeah, a couple of things. I think one thing it's saying is the maximum limit on this is 6 years.
That's right.
You can't go indefinitely. Well, I'm just hired. You're just a bond servant in perpetuity. Well, that's different. That's a slave.
Yeah.
This is a fixed time for this contract. The other thing is, the implication of a bond servant is you're drawing him into your operations, and he's someone you you're implicitly have more confidence, and you think you're giving up. You're being more vulnerable, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
You have more confidence. You don't pick those guys as loosely as you would a hired servant.
Exactly.
A hired servant, I don't really care.
Exactly.
I'm going to be more choosy about my bond servants who I want, because they're going to be closer to what my operation is, and someone I have to have a lot of confidence in.
Yeah. And it's typically the reason the bond servant the servant would choose to become a bond servant is because it says for love. It's this, you've been good to me. This is a good job. I like where I sleep, and the food's good here. And you're a great guy. I can see myself doing this from now on. And that's a good thing. That's what you'd actually like to have. And that's what, by the way, that's why all the apostles always started their letters, so-and-so, a bond servant of Messiah, Yes.
So it's very interesting because this concept causes first of all, I wanted to say, how did the master get to the place of master? He's blessed by the hand of the Almighty. So he's been blessed in all that he has, kind of like Abraham was. And so it's evident that the Lord was with him. So people would like to come and say, hey, I'd like to serve you. I'll sell myself to you, which is why, as John said, people sell themselves to a company. It looks like a really good company. They've been blessed.
Yeah.
I'll sell myself to you for $10, $20, $30 an hour.
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing is, if the employer, if the slave wants to stay, what's he going to need to do? He's going to need to work very well, do a very good job. If he likes the master and the place where he's been staying, the food that he's been eating, all the stuff that's going on, he's certainly not going to be just half-heartedly doing his job.
Yeah.
Come release time, what's going to happen? You're going to get released.
Yeah.
But if he's doing a really good job, he's wanting to make sure, hey, I want to stay, so I've got to do a good job, so he'll want to keep me.
Yeah.
The other side of the coin is, if the master wants to keep this slave because is good work, he's going to treat him really well.
Yeah.
So
it goes both ways.
Yeah,
and
both benefit.
Yeah, the best example is when Abraham sent Eleazar to get a wife for Isaac. That was the best example because that guy, he was committed, Yeah.
I have a better example.
Okay.
Jacob
Yeah.
and Laban, and he gave himself over to hire for 7 years, and then he did another 7 years for love.
Yeah, that's a good one. That works.
And and he even, when at the end of the time, he sent him away, like it says here, with flocks and stuff.
Well, he kind of had to take them, but yeah, you're right. Yeah, he says treat your employees well. The other side of that coin.
I just have a question.
Sure.
So for verse 17, when it says, "Then you shall take an awl and thrust it through his ear to the door," like that just strikes me funny. I don't really know what that means. I'm sure you've done this, 16 times, like you said. Like, what have you learned that could kind of mean?
What it's
at least symbolically,
it's just piercing the ear. If you see some back in that day, if you saw some guy walking around, I assume this, it was probably, I don't know, the left ear, the right ear, I'm not sure, and he had a gold ring through a hole in his ear. You knew that guy was a bondservant.
Oh, so it's just like to distinguish.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. That's fine. That's a good question.
The Bible doesn't address this from the master's point of view, but what if the bondservant says, my bond is up, and I really love this place, and I want to stay here, so I'm staying. And the master says, no. Does he have the right to refuse? I would say he does. It doesn't explicitly say that, but
I would think he does. I would think that I can imagine a scenario where the guy says, I think I'll stay. I'd like to stay. And the master says, well, you're not as good as you think you are. Your term's up, and it might be good for you. There's probably other places out there you might like a little better. It's okay for you to go look. Without kicking him out, it would be an opportunity for them to have a very deep performance evaluation.
Right. I mean, he still has to provide for him and do all those things that it requires. But it seems to me it's not a binding contract if you don't have both parties to agree.
That's
and if the master says, this isn't working out for me. You may think it's a good deal for you, but I'm not seeing
it. Well, it could be something like, I'm going to be gone for the next 5 years. I'm not going to need anybody. Or it could be, you're right. I think you're right.
Well, and I think depending on the business that the boss has, the master has, it might not be in his business plan to have that many.
Yeah.
And usually there's a provision that you're going to give him a good severance pay.
Yeah, that's what it says here. Yeah. It says don't send him away without anything.
So they get a good severance pay.
Give him flocks, give him, lots of stuff. Yeah.
And that's, I think some of the companies today, they apply the severance pay rule. Like the longer you've been with them, the bigger the severance pay that you get. And so
when I a lot of times when I look at this, I look at my career with HP, and I was a bond servant to those guys. Man, I gave them everything for 20 years or so. And when they sent me off with a year's pay. That was a pretty good deal, I thought.
Well, and I think most of us now, we have a job, and we're pretty much indentured for 8 hours, 5 or 6 days a week, whatever it is that we're working. We are indentured.
Yeah.
You got to get up in the morning.
Well, that's one of the things that debt does for you.
Yeah.
So these things are fun to think about as they exist here. You have to be careful to realize that the economy and the way things were done were different. But much of the attitudes, much of the implications, and much of the stuff that goes on is very, very relevant to us. Mike.
I actually have a situation where the guy I work for, it is kind of like a owner bondservant type of a relationship, because he has the company, and he's had this company, I don't know, like 30, 40 years or something.
Yeah.
And I've worked for him in the past when he had an office, and everyone, he took out your taxes, and he paid you for holidays and all that kind of stuff. And you had to be there at 7 o'clock in the morning and work till 4 o'clock, and I've had jobs where you had to punch the clock, and you had to be there, if you're, they give you 5 minutes if you're 5 minutes late. But with him, when things got bad back 10 years ago, and he almost lost the company because there was no more work. Things were kind of dried up. But and now I work at home. There's only 3 of us. We all work at our own houses. And we just communicate by email, telephone, and I get up in the morning, make the coffee, and I work, and so we have it's kind of almost an unspoken contract where I'll work my 40 hours, and he'll trust me that I'll do that, and I'm and I'm not going to do that, I'm going to work 40 plus, or whatever it is, and he pays me every week on time. He pays me quite well too. And so, and since it seems like I've thought about this lately, since I've been studying the Torah, Yahweh has blessed me quite a bit. And I'm seeing his company being blessed.
Yes.
And it's like, wow, this is pretty amazing. And for me, I'm just thankful, to have, it's almost like Eliezer, like, he's a great guy. John's met him, and he's one of these people that, has integrity, which is something kind of lacking in business today, almost to a fault, and he trusts people, and fortunately, he gets burned a lot because he trusts people. People take advantage of him, especially when you work in the construction industry. There's a lot of people who, they just want to take advantage of you.
Yeah.
But, he's the one out getting the work, dealing with the customers. And for me, it's great, to have a job like this. I never would imagine, like 20, 30 years ago when I was going to a place to work, and raising kids, it was.
Yeah, no, I know exactly
just
what you're saying.
Sometimes like you say, you feel like a slave, but these days I don't feel like a slave, but I do feel kind of like a bondservant, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. That's, like I say, these are the things that are talked about here apply today, even though the rules are quite different. And I think those are important things to notice. God knows our situations in detail for each of us. And so he knows exactly when and how to bless people. Yeah. Did someone else have a question? Well, okay, we can go on. And notice you just did you have something you want to say?
Well, just briefly, it could be that master or only planned to have him just for that 6 years, and
could be, yeah,
because he needed him to manage a project for 6 years, expanding whatever he does.
Yeah, could be. Well, I appreciate you allowing me the time to spend on that particular subject, because I didn't feel good about the way we left it last week, so now we can go on. I think we were actually, probably beyond this anyway. Would someone like to read in chapter 15 from verse 19 to the end of the chapter? You need the microphone.
All the firstling males that come of thy herd and of thy flock, thou shalt sanctify unto the Lord thy God. Thou shalt do no work with the firstlings of thine ox, nor shears the firstling of thy sheep. Thou shalt eat it before the Lord thy God, year by year, in the place which the Lord shall choose. Thou and thy household, and if there be any blemish therein, as if it be lame or blind, or have any ill blemishes, thou shalt not sacrifice it unto the Lord thy God. Thou shalt eat it within thy gates. The unclean and the clean person shall eat it alike, as the lowbuck, and as the harp. Only thou shalt not eat the blood thereof. Thou shalt pour it upon the ground as water.
Okay, so can somebody paraphrase that and tell me what the rules are? What's the rule there? To whom do the firstborn male animals belong? God.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. And what was to be done with them? They were sacrificed to God, unless, except under one circumstance. When weren't they to be sacrificed to God? If they were blemished, if they were unfit somehow, three-legged cow or whatever, right? Now, I just think it's kind of interesting. If you read through scriptures, you'll find that God, a lot of times, through his prophets, has complained about the Israelites because they present to him animals that are defective. And he says very clearly here, he has said it before, and he'll say it again, don't offer defective animals to me. Yeah.
So I don't understand why they would do that, because who consumes the sacrifice?
They do.
They do. So
Yeah.
all you're doing is saying bless. You're being formal about
Yeah.
what you're going to do before you eat it. Is the difference that you have to pay? You have to give it to your household. I mean, why wouldn't you do that anyway? I mean,
Well, I think if it's blemished, you're going to give it to your household. And it says that. It says, if it's not suitable for sacrifice to me, you can slaughter it and eat it. That's okay. But don't offer it as a sacrifice to me, is what he's saying. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's right.
well, is that what it says? Or
I believe so. It says if an animal has a defect.
So what kind of sacrifice? Is this a whole burnt offering type sacrifice?
Probably. Well, they don't get to eat those.
Obviously. That's what I'm
and
saying.
as a matter of fact, you're right. That's what this one is. The firstborn is a whole burnt offering.
Oh.
Okay. So
that makes a difference.
That does make a difference.
Because then you don't get to consume
You don't get
that.
to eat. Okay. Sorry about that.
Well, I didn't think I didn't know that's what it was.
I'm
but
pretty sure that's
what
right.
it is.
Yep.
That it is.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, you do. Because, yeah.
All right. The origin of this one, go back to Genesis chapter 4:4, where Cain and Abel made the first sacrifices.
Yep.
And again, it stresses the first thing and the best.
Yes.
Where his brother brought whatever.
Just some.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
So the quality and the firstborn is critical.
Yep. You're exactly right. You're exactly right.
Yeah, I thought the firstborn of the herds and the flocks and the crops and everything. Well, we're not talking about the crops here, but
it could be.
I thought that was the tithe that went to the priest, and the priest can use it for their consumption.
I think of the animal. It's probably true for the crops. Okay, but I don't think it's necessarily true for the animals. I think the animals needed to be sacrificed. We can easily look this up, right?
Okay, yeah,
But,
I think
because
yeah, so it would have to be in the temple, in the tabernacle.
Yeah. Like I say, I could be wrong. I'm just telling you what I think.
So let me just read the first couple of the two verses.
Okay.
All the firstling males that come of thy herd and of thy flock thou shalt sanctify unto Jehovah thy God. Thou shalt do no work with the firstlings of the bullock, nor shear the firstlings of thy sheep. Thou shalt eat it before Yahweh thy Elohim
in the presence,
in the place wherein Yahweh shall choose. So you have to take it to Jerusalem. You have to sacrifice this, but it
says share it, so it's not a burnt offering.
Right.
Okay, I'm wrong.
But part of it is what Margaret is, I think, suggesting. A portion of that goes to Levi, to the priest.
Yes. Whenever
so you're not eating it all.
Yes. When it's not a burnt offering is totally consumed. But when it's another one, it could be fellowship offering, let's say. Then yeah, it's shared. And the Levites get a specific part of it. God gets a specific part of it. And the offerer gets a specific part.
So the evil eye way of thinking is, I'd rather share a blemished thing because I'd rather have less of that and have all of my firstborn. I'm trying to find out what the motivation for somebody.
I think the motivation might be, boy, this male calf is a good looking calf. I'm going to keep him around and breed him.
To breed him. Okay,
he's going to be a valuable animal for me. So that's one reason.
My mind just goes like,
oh boy, I'm glad
one
that
of those
happens
moments,
to you.
senior moments. It seems like, okay, now I remember, menudo, the maw. Didn't they get, the priest used to get of the first of the tithe, they used to get, isn't it the
shoulder or something?
The shoulder and the maw, and then there's certain parts that have to be.
I don't remember what they are, but there are certain parts.
Right, and I always think of that because when we first started studying and keeping scripture, we used to kid around and say, we're going to have the Levite stew, which is menudo, and the Mexicans traditionally have, and they get the maw, and I always wondered what's so special about
what's the maw?
The maw is the stomachs.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I'll be darned. Isn't it fun what you learn here? Okay. Anything else about that? Let's move on. These next few chapters in Deuteronomy have got a whole bunch of little details, but sometimes these little details can lead you in interesting directions. We're in chapter 16. Now, chapter 16 is kind of a review of, for the most part, is a review of the feast days of the Moedim. Moed is an appointed time, and Moedim are appointed times. And so that's a nice word to remember in Hebrew. Would somebody like to read chapter 16 from the beginning through verse 8?
Eight is not bad. Chapter 16. Observe the month of Abib and keep the Passover unto Yahweh thy Elohim. For in the month of Abib, Yahweh thy Elohim brought thee forth out of Egypt by night. Thou shalt therefore sacrifice the Passover unto Yahweh thy Elohim of the flock of the herd in the place which Yahweh shall choose to place his name there. Thou shalt eat no leavened bread with it. 7 days shalt thou eat unleavened bread therewith, even the bread of affliction, for thou came forth out of the land of Egypt in haste, that thou may remember the day when thou came forth out of the land of Egypt all the days of thy life. And there shall be no leavened bread seen with thee in all thy coast 7 days, neither shall there anything of flesh which thou sacrificed the first day at evening remain all night until the morning. Thou may not sacrifice the Passover within any of your gates which Yahweh thy Elohim gives thee, but at a place which Yahweh thy Elohim shall choose to place his name there. There thou shalt sacrifice the Passover at evening, at the going down of the sun, at the season that thou camest forth out of Egypt. And thou shalt roast and eat it in the place which Yahweh thy Elohim shall choose. And thou shalt turn in the morning and go unto thy tents. 6 days shalt thou eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day shall be a solemn assembly. To Yahweh thy Elohim thou shalt do no work therein.
Okay. So this basically is the first 3 of the Moedim. The description here is not as complete as the description in Leviticus, right? It's a little more complete. And there's some controversy about this, even to this day, of course. It's pretty clear when the Passover occurred. It's the 15th of the month of Abib, which has been renamed Nisan. Abib means spring. So the way we count that, the way it seems to me makes most sense, is the spring starts after the spring equinox. So the first full moon after the spring equinox starts the month of Abib, because each month starts on the first new moon. Each month starts on a new moon. So 15 days after a new moon is a full moon, And that would be a nice, bright, full moon spring night. And that day is when you have the Passover. Okay? And then it says you eat 7 days, you eat no leavened bread. The thing that's missing in this description is it's a thing they call first fruits or the beginning harvest, and reshit, something or other. I never can remember quite the name, but there's some controversy about when that is. But if you read it in Leviticus, it kind of looks to me like it's the day following the Shabbat that occurs during that week that you're eating unleavened bread. But it doesn't talk about it here. So, but that's something that you can read more about. Any questions about that? You got those 3 down? We know kind of what we're talking about. So somebody want to read from chapter 9 through 12? Verse 9, sorry. Verse 9 through 12 of that chapter? Yep, feel free.
I find it interesting that this word for sacrifice, just a couple of things on this. So God's saying it's his sacrifice, but it's not done on an altar.
That's right. Yeah. Originally, it was done in people's homes, right?
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And to my knowledge, I don't think they were doing it on an altar. I mean, they would take it and they would, where's this animal supposed to go? On a
spit?
Yeah, isn't it? That's the commandment of the Pesach.
They say you roast it, don't boil it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so even though this word sacrifice in Hebrew, it's what it means. You could term it as a slaughter, but here you've got a sacrifice being done without an altar, which is, I just find it very interesting.
That is.
But the Hebrew word here is zavakta. Sounds a lot familiar, real close to sabachthani, which Yeshua cried out on the stake.
What was
Eli,
that?
Eli, lama sabachthani.
Yeah.
The S in English that's been translated as S could have easily been the Z.
Yeah.
Would have been a similar sound. The B and the V are interchangeable.
Yeah.
So literally could have been zavachthani.
Yeah.
Referring to, I'm the sacrifice.
That's good. One of the things that occurred to me as I read this for the umpteenth time is that it says, it's making a big deal about the Passover sacrifice is to occur in the place that he will put his name, right? But I'm not, let's see, how can I put it? I know that 3 times a year, all your men have to go to Jerusalem to observe this, but a lot of people didn't go. I mean, certainly families didn't go, necessarily the entire family. Sometimes they would, I'm sure. Older people probably couldn't make the journey. You know, it's a long ways to Jerusalem from some of the parts of Israel. So I wonder if they didn't celebrate the Passover in the way that it was celebrated at the original time, but this was the actual sacrifice that was done at the temple. Do you think that might be true? Okay. Anyway, I don't know that. Something for you to think about. Okay. Does somebody want to read from? Well, no, I'm not. Oh, you're not done yet.
I just had another epiphany on this, and that is because they've interpreted this in Matthew. My God, why have you forsaken me? And it's been debated. I mean, people, it doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense. What's all this about? What if he's saying, because it's repeated. This same phrase is over in Psalm 22. So you can see the actual Hebrew words. And lama, la is to.
Yeah.
But it can be what or why. And it just hit me. If he was saying, Eli, Eli, which is
God.
My God, my God.
Yeah.
What if he was saying, like Isaac said to his father, where's the sacrifice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's it. That's interesting. Margaret?
when Joshua was in the torture state, that he said, Sabachta, this Sabachta is what he said. So really what he was saying is, Mael, why are you killing me? Pretty much. Where you say?
Here's the sacrifice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could be. I mean, that fits. Okay. Let's move on and read this verse 9 through 12. You want to do that, Mike, or you have some
9 through
comment?
12?
Yeah, verse 9 through 12.
Oh, I did have a comment on that.
Well, go ahead if you want.
I have read when he said, "Why have you forsaken me?" What he was saying was, why have you left me hanging here when the work has been done? Why are you prolonging this? And then immediately after, he gave up the spirit and died.
Yeah. So, yeah, that still fits. I mean,
I actually read that in that Roth book that you have over there. I have a copy. Pardon me? No, it's the English Aramaic Bible. There's a copy of it over there, but
okay.
What was the guy's name again? Roth? Gabriel Roth, that's it.
Okay. So
9 through 12?
9 through 12, thanks.
Okay. 7 weeks shalt thou number to thyself when thou hast begun to put the sickle to the corn. Thou shalt begin to number 7 weeks, and thou shalt keep the feast of weeks to the Lord thy God, accordingly as thy hand has power in as many things as the Lord thy God shall give thee. And thou shalt rejoice before the Lord thy God, thou and thy son and thy daughter, thy manservant, thy maidservant, and the Levite, and the stranger, and the orphan, and the widow which dwells among you, in whatsoever place the Lord thy God shall choose, that his name should be called there. And thou shalt remember that thou wast a servant in the land of Egypt, thou shalt observe and do these commands.
Okay. So this is
the Septuagint. That's why it says corn.
Corn, yeah. The this is the middle feast, right? The feasts are laid out. Oh, what is it? Well, they're laid out 3, 1, 3. So the first 3, the spring feast we talked about. This is the middle one, the Feast of Weeks. It's called Pentecost. Pentecost means 50, and the rule is you count from the feast of first fruits of the barley harvest that occurs during the week of Passover, and you count 7 Shabbats. 7 times 7 is 49, and the next day is 50, and that's in Greek, Pentecost means 50, and that's why they call it weeks, is because it's a week of weeks. It's 7 weeks, and that's the feast that happens then. And then 13 through 17. Does somebody want, unless there are any questions about the Feast of Weeks? Okay, 13. That happens usually like early summer. 13 through 17. Somebody want to read that? We're wearing all you guys out. I'll do it. Verse 13. Celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days after you have gathered the produce of your threshing floor and your winepress. Be joyful in your feast, you, your sons and daughters, your menservant, maidservant, and the Levites, the aliens, the fatherless, and the widows who live in your towns. For 7 days celebrate the feast of Yahweh your God at the place Yahweh will choose. For Yahweh your God will bless you in all your harvest and in all your work of your hands, and your joy will be complete. 3 times a year all your men must appear before Yahweh your God at the place that he will choose, at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Tabernacles. No man should appear before Yahweh empty-handed. Each of you must bring a gift in proportion to the way that Yahweh your God has blessed you. So that's the rules for how the Israelites are to observe his appointed times in Jerusalem, or in Israel, I should say, in the land that he is giving them. And we've been through the holidays, so
So, what is the amount?
Beg your pardon?
What is the amount that he has to bring?
Well, the amount.
Every man shall give as he is able, comma, according to the blessing of Jehovah thy God, which he hath given you.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a tithe?
Yes.
Is it 10%?
I'm sure it is. But
Okay.
it may be more than that, but I'm sure it's that.
What?
The
It's
tithe.
more if you want to pay more, I suppose, or
Yeah.
give more.
Well, I think the idea is, the way I read it, is the gift should be in proportion to the way that God has blessed you. Now,
Well,
if you're coming
10
to him,
10%.
if you're coming to him with an appreciation of his blessing, and you read about the tithe and everything, then I would think that might be what you do. But you might think to yourself, man, this has really been a good year, and give him more. I can't imagine you thinking, not so hot. I think I'll skimp.
That's fine. I'm just, you're given, if you get blessed more and you're going by a percentage, then you're going to pay more.
That's true too.
Okay.
That's true too.
So, in response to tag on what John was saying, on these pilgrimage feasts, when they brought their stuff, it was 10%. But when they brought it, remember, they're bringing it to the Abba to share, right?
Yep.
And so this tithe, that's the 3 times a year, which is in addition to the 10% monthly and then the yearly tithe, and then there's a 3-year tithe. So there's quite a few tithes. People always think it's just 10%. No. Anyway, so this tithe here on the 3 times per year, when they brought the 10%, it was divvied up between 5 people. A fifth was given to the widow, the poor, the orphan, the Levite, and the 5th piece went to the person who brought the tithe.
Okay.
And that's how it's divvied.
I didn't know that. That's interesting. Earmarked. I love that term.
I heard a teaching about how when we come to the feast, and the custom used to be, I don't know, the custom isn't now. The custom used to be any time, and I remember this even with my mother and anybody that came to visit, they always brought something, a gift, something special, either crops or something special that they made, like it was either peanut brittle or sometimes it was a grain that they grind, and sometimes it was chili peppers or whatever. And I think that's what it is. Anytime somebody comes to visit you, you also give them a gift.
Yeah.
And so this gift giving was a custom. And I think we've gotten very kind of selfish and self-centered, and we don't think of doing that.
Yeah.
That people are taking time. You know, they're usually going through an expense of going to travel and inconveniences and whatever. And I think with Yahweh, it's the same thing. We need to almost be just out of our seats and excited about bringing our gift to Him.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, people get all excited during Christmas. Okay, I'm going to buy my kids this and I'm going to buy my kids that. Well, a lot of times I think, well, where does the birthday boy get? Usually nothing.
Yeah, I was going to say, speaking as someone that was born near Christmas, I can identify with that.
usually the birthday boy that Yeshua gets in zilch.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking we should be as excited as people, excited even more because we have the truth.
Sure.
To be bringing a gift, and that should be the highlight. That's the highlight.
Yeah,
you know?
and God says a whole lot about that.
And you can just imagine back in temple times, you're doing the trek up here to Jerusalem, and you're standing in line to get in to offer your gift. It's a special thing that you do.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
I think that we just don't have an appreciation for the specialness of it is until you start doing it, and then you start realizing.
I think if you
hey,
reflect on things a little bit, and you kind of start thinking about His Torah and what He expects, it becomes more real.
I'm laughing because I wasn't paying attention, but in verse 11, it lists the 5.
Oh, does it?
Yeah, it says, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you, your son, and your daughter. So that's the offerer with his male and female servants. The Levite, 2.
Yes.
The stranger, 3. The orphan, 4. And the widow is 5.
I'll be.
That's your 5 splits of the 10% that's brought at the 3.
I was thinking, where did you find that in Scripture? And there it is.
I want to just continue from what Margaret was saying because I think that's really amazing how she put it. Because I looked back at my grandparents and they would always come over and bring us gifts.
Yeah.
And I would always look forward to seeing my grandparents.
Yeah.
And I think we should probably do that for any of our family members or friends or something. And that's something I've been learning all night tonight is, gift giving and being, sharing, because nothing that we own is really ours.
That's right.
So I think that's a wonderful lesson. And so every time someone comes over or we go over to someone else's, place where they're living, bring gifts and share in what's been given to us. And then for those special days where we get to visit with our God, we bring him gifts. Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
It really does. And he appreciates it. And boy, that's what you really like. At least I do. Having God appreciate what you do is really, really nice.
So kind of what you were saying and what was just said, that by figuring out, well, how much did God bless me, and you're mentally going through this practice, and okay, here's what my tithes should be, you're literally counting your blessings, aren't you?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
So that's a good thing. You were in the habit of literally counting your blessings.
Yeah. Well, and we read that part already, I think, here, where you count your blessings. You count your blessings, and if you look at them and you say, good golly, this is going to take, 14 Mack trucks to get all this stuff to my tithes to Jerusalem. He says, well, that's okay. Sell it and take the money and go to Jerusalem and use the money to buy a gift for God and have a very nice time celebrating your fortune. Yeah, no kidding. Esther.
I just wanted to say something real quick.
Okay.
We have a guest named Hadassah here visiting.
Yep. Oh,
She stayed at my house today, and she gave me a gift.
Good deal.
It was really nice.
A really
Thank
nice
you.
gift. Hadassah
And
is...
so people are still doing stuff like that.
Yeah, good. Hadassah is visiting us from Holland. So if you get a chance to chat with her, she's over here to meet the rest of her family, so to speak, or at least... Yeah. So that's really a good thing. I should have introduced you earlier.
Yeah, and I think we have the other Hadassah, whose name is Esther.
Yeah.
Our artist.
2 Esthers or 2 Hadassahs,
Yeah,
however you want to look at it.
and I know she had a women's meeting at her house, and she gave us all gifts.
Yeah, I remember that. I wasn't there, but my wife was.
So did your wife.
Yeah.
Yeah, hallelujah.
Yeah.
And that was special.
Yes, you bet. Yep, it certainly was. Okay, let's see. I'm going to read, since it's just a couple of verses here. The end of chapter 16, starting at verse 18. Appoint judges and officials for each of your tribes in every town that Yahweh your God is giving you, and they shall judge the people fairly. Do not pervert justice or show partiality. Do not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the righteous. Follow justice and justice alone, so that you may live and possess the land that Yahweh your God is giving you. I think there's lots in that little 2-verse section right there. First of all, where do the judges come from? No. Yeah, in each of your tribes, it's talking to the people of Israel. You appoint judges. It doesn't really say exactly how, but given what they do, what kind of people are you going to want to appoint as judges in your town, in your tribe, from your tribe?
Who judge justice rightly.
Yes, rightly.
When
Mike was talking about his boss, a man of integrity, You're going to want, you know who they are. You know, you can look around and you can kind of identify guys that are, they get caught doing the right things, so to speak. You know, people that have a great deal of integrity and are known in the community for being righteous and being fair and not being self-serving. I mean, you know, there's a list of them in the book of Timothy, right? So, and what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to not pervert justice, show no partiality, accept no bribes, and do not, don't allow twisted words. Go ahead, John. I figured you'd have something to say about this.
Well, I want to kind of go back to the first part. You know, I believe in the maxim that the government reflects the people.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing, at the end of the day, if the people aren't righteous, the government's not going to be righteous.
That's right.
And so if you're a righteous person and you're going to select a righteous person because you know that's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And it's to your benefit. It's the right thing to do. And if you're not, if you think, oh, I'm in this scheme, I can slip this guy a little money and he'll favor things my way. At the end of the day, it's not going to work out in the long term.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the kind of stuff that I guess the simplicity of this is almost overwhelming. It's basically the only way you're going to have a just society is if you have justice within it. You know, you have just people. Nobody's perfect, and that's okay. People can learn. I mean, I do. We all do. So, but justice ought to be, so it says, justice, follow justice, and justice alone. And so that implies that you can know what it is, and here's where to find it, right? Because these are the rules. So I don't know. I just think that's a neat little 2-3 verse thing there. Follow justice and justice alone so that you may live and possess the land that Yahweh your God is giving you. And I have to say, being the really nicky negative that I am, when I look around at what's going on today, boy, it doesn't look a lot like that around here, does it? There's some good things. There are spots. And those spots, I'm convinced, are marked by the fact that there's a good number of righteous believers that understand the role that justice plays in society in that place. And in places where you don't see it, there probably aren't as many. So I don't know. I just think it's kind of interesting. I don't want to quit yet because I haven't gotten very far. Is this too slow or are we doing okay? Okay. So why don't we have someone read from verse 21 through the rest of 16 and into verse 17 through verse 13 of that. No. Let's just read down through verse 8. My title to that little section calls Worshiping Other Gods. John?
So I'm 21, 16:21?
Yep, 16:21 through 17:7.
Thou shalt not plant thee a grove of any trees near unto the altar of Jehovah thy Elohim, which thou shalt make thee. Neither shalt thou set thee up any image which Yahweh thy God hateth. Thou shalt not sacrifice unto Yahweh thy Elohim any bullock or sheep wherein is blemish, or any evil favoredness, for all that is an abomination unto Yahweh thy Elohim. If there be found among you within any of thy gates, which Yahweh thy God giveth thee, man or woman that hath wrought wickedness in the sight of Jehovah thy Elohim, in transgressing his covenant, and hath gone and served other gods and worshipped them, either the sun or moon or any of the host of heaven, which I have not commanded, and it be told thee, and thou hast heard of it, and inquired diligently, and behold, it be true, and the thing certain that such abomination is wrought in Israel, then shalt thou bring forth the man or the woman which hath committed that wicked thing unto thy gates, even that man or that woman, and shalt stone them with stones till they die. At the mouth of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall he that is worthy of death be put to death. but at the mouth of one witness he shall not be put to death. The hands of the witness shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterward the hands of all the people so thou shalt put the evil away from among you.
Okay. Deuteronomy's really got, I don't know, it's got really great stuff in it. So what's the complaint, or what situation are we talking here? Beg your pardon? It's worshiping other gods, right? Talks about putting up Asherah poles or groves, building an altar. Anyway, yes, Joe.
This Hebrew Bible that I'm looking at, it says, neither thou shalt set thee up any pillars. Well, a pillar is a platform. So the idea is if you set, you know what the other images are, but behind the images are the pillars, holding those up before God.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think I do. Okay. Anyway, the point is worshiping other gods, right? Great, Kenny. We haven't heard from you.
In the Sefer, in the, what is it, 1621, it says, you shall not plant an Asherah pole of any trees near the altar unto Yahweh.
That's what mine says.
And then I checked it in the Hebrew, and that's actually what it says, which is
good.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Asherah, who's Asherah? Beg your pardon? Yeah, it's Astarte or Asherah. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's a pagan god of fertility. And so that was one of the ones that would, if you will, in quotes, compete with God in terms of these pagan cultures. Another one was Molech, yeah. And there are several of them. Well, yeah, he was one. But anyway, God says it very clearly here, for these Yahweh your God hates. Do not sacrifice to Yahweh a defective animal. That's where he says, not a defective animal. And then it says, if anybody, man or woman, should be found worshiping other gods or bowing down to them, and then it lists, or the moon, or the sun, or the stars of the sky. It's been brought to your attention, you have to investigate it thoroughly, mine says. And if it's true, then what's the rule for, you take them to the city gates and you stone them, but how is the rule to have found them guilty? How does that work? 2, at least 2. You cannot kill someone, you cannot punish with capital punishment, whatever, with only one witness. You have to have 2. This is one of the things, I mean, this is so obvious, it's so clear, it's not funny, but I can't help but think about the story of, I guess it was Nabob, I think his name, Nabob's Vineyard. You don't know that story? Nabob's Vineyard. I'll tell a story, then we'll quit. This was during the reign of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, and Nabob was this old Jewish guy. I guess he was an Israelite, actually, because it was in the northern kingdom. And he had this nice little vineyard over here somewhere in the land that was really cool. And one day, old Jezebel was walking around the castle there, and she saw Ahab, and he was kind of dejected. And she said, what's the matter? And he said, I'm really bummed because there's this really cool little vineyard over here, and I'd really like to have it, but it belongs to this citizen named Nabob. And so I went and asked him if I could buy it. And he said, no. He said, it's been in our family forever, and I love this little vineyard. I'm not going to sell it. And so I'm kind of disappointed, Ahab says. And Jezebel says, no problem, I'll take care of it for you. So a little while later, you go to a commercial, then you come back. A little while later, they're arresting old Nabob because 2 people have accused him of this. I think they saw him worshiping, they gave testimony that he worshiped pagan pagan gods. So they, boy, this is terrible. Can't have this. Hauled him out to the city gates and stoned him to death. And then Ahab was able to get the vineyard. And what a horrible story, right? When Ahab, got the vineyard, or Jezebel said, you can get the vineyard now or whatever, he kind of learned what she'd done, and he just kind of ignored it. He just acted like it didn't, well, I didn't tell you to do that. It's not my fault. But man, it shows you what state of society can get in. It shows you, it shows you how far from God you can get. And that whenever I read that, I always think about old Naboth's vineyard. Yeah.
Two things I wanted to say. One is back in verse 18 through 20, it talks about you shall appoint judges and officers.
Yep.
I can't tell you how many communities I know that completely do not believe that there should be any overseers of the community. Oh, yeah. There's just there's anyone's authority over anyone, nobody. And clearly God is saying there's judges and there's overseers. I mean, it's just, I don't know how people get around that. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out. Okay. God wants, and he says, in your towns, according to your tribes, he wants there to be judges among you.
You can appoint them, but
keeps people accountable, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing was in verse 6, on the evidence of 2 witnesses or 3, but he shall not be put to death on the evidence of 1 witness. And remember, we gotta keep remembering this, that people love to hear someone say something and join with them in proclaiming that someone is guilty at something.
Yep.
And this Hebrew word for witness means, like God says he provides witnesses, they are just true witnesses that have seen or heard the act with their own eyes or ears.
Yep.
So when people come and say something to us about somebody, did you see it? Did you hear it? Okay, great. Well, I didn't. Where's the other witness?
Mm-hmm.
You can't join me in with your issue because I didn't see it or I didn't hear it.
Yeah, you can't recruit me as a witness.
But where's your backup? Because you've got to have a backup to affirm what you're telling me.
Yeah, yeah.
Without the other one, there's no affirmation of your testimony.
Hear, hear. Yep.
Yeah, to add on to, or to agree with what Mark's saying here, let's read verse 4 and go through it slowly. And it be told thee, or was it hearsay? No, it was told you, and thou hast heard of it, and inquired.
Investigate thoroughly.
Inquired diligently.
Diligently, yeah.
And behold it to be true. And the thing certain that such abomination is wrought.
Yeah.
Then shalt thou bring forth a man or a woman which hath committed that wicked thing unto thy gates. Even that man or that woman shall stone them with stones till they die. So verse 4 is like constraint upon constraint upon constraint upon constraint. You better know what you're doing before you start throwing rocks.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. Any other thoughts? Okay, I'll close in prayer. Father God, thank you for the evening. Thank you for the discussion. Thanks for the fun of looking at your word and trying to understand it better and applying it to where we live and how we live today. Help us to think on these things during the week, to figure out how we can apply them in our lives, and just continue to lead us, God, that we might become more useful tools to you and that we can be a part of the thing that you're doing in the world today. I thank you for this group of people and ask that you bless us until we meet together again. In Yahushua's name, amen. Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks a lot. It's been fun.